I want to just thank LevelTen Energy for coming out today to talk to us about virtual power purchase agreements. We're joined now by Tinoco, who is going to be leading us through this presentation. And if anyone does have any questions, please throw them in the chat and we can answer them throughout the presentation or in the Q&A at the end. Just a little bit about Seattle 2030 District for those that don't know. Seattle 2030 District is a membership organization representing building owners, property managers, architects, engineers, anybody that's working in the built environment, all with the goal of reaching a 50% reduction in emissions across energy, water, and transportation by the year 2030. We are very pleased to have great sponsors like Unico, Hudson Pacific Properties, Better Bricks, and just a host of other folks, including Boeing, the Bullitt Foundation, and King County, who have been really fantastic supporters of our work. So, you know, we do these education forums on a monthly basis, and if you have any topics that you would like to see come up, please let us know, and we will try to make sure that those are available. I think virtual power purchase agreements are a really interesting opportunity for building owners and for folks working in the built environment. And we're very excited to learn more. So Christian, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. I'm Christian Tinoco here, as Daniel mentioned, from LevelTen Energy, pretty local to the area. We have our headquarters here in the Seattle area. LevelTen Energy, we're a renewable energy procurement infrastructure platform. So we, are really spearheading the renewable energy transition and connecting both the demand side and supply side of the market. So whether that's developers or corporate buyers or anyone in the C&I space. We also provide capital, platforms as well for tax equity, any direct purchases or auctions of projects as well, and a variety of other services, such as some initial advisory on the procurement process itself, VPPA contracting. So really just the transparency and liquidity and just standardizing the whole process around the industry to make these transactions a lot more faster and a lot more transparent for corporate off-takers. So a little bit more about LevelTen and what the marketplace is. So the marketplace is really a centralized location for buyers to source renewable energy projects. Think of it as a Redfin or a Zillow, or just purchasing a house. So you're able to log into the marketplace, find renewable energy assets, see what the price is of that project, when the COD date is of the project, some other variables such as analytics, and how that project is forecasted to perform based on third-party forward curves and other fundamental curves that we run through the platform. And that's very important, as we'll talk in a little bit more about what a VPPA is, a virtual power purchase agreement, which is virtually a contract that is in itself just virtual. It's not physical delivered power. It's a virtual power purchase agreement, and there's cons and pros to it. So we'll discuss that in just a bit. But in the platform itself, there's over 4,300 price offers, over 1,800 active projects through the marketplace. So that's in mostly regulated markets throughout the United States, wholesale energy markets, and we'll speak about those in a little bit more in just a few more minutes. And we're also active in Europe, and we have over 580 global developers in the platform at this point in time. So as I mentioned, we are the primary infrastructure in the market for renewable energy procurement. And with that, we've partnered with some of the leading advisor and consultant shops around the world. So some of our direct clients, as you see there, are some locals here in Starbucks, Microsoft, variety of others as well, Workday, Lululemon. Those are some of our current partners or current direct corporate buyers that we currently work with. There's also select partners that we've also partnered with, such as Accenture, 3 Degrees, G Impact, BCG. Those are all partners that would lead corporate off-takers through the advisory through the pre-PPA stages and ultimately through the procurement phase. So after this call, if anyone's interested to be in contact with any of our partners, feel free to reach out to me. I'll connect you with any one of these partners, and hopefully we could get a dialogue started and help you guys procure. So first off, I'll start with, begin from the very back end. What are wholesale energy markets here in the United States, and how is the energy system here in the United States, and how does it work? So VPPAs are able to be, contracted in what we call wholesale electric power markets. So those are liquid trading power markets in the United States. Those are markets where the utilities don't own the generation assets and the distribution assets. So that is why in these markets, you're able to go out to market and, procure a VPPA. So essentially, the production of the energy is disconnected from the distribution, which is the utilities. So you're able to, get a power source, whether that would be a wind project, a solar project, there's a variety of others, hydro as well, and you're able to sign a VPPA with that project. In some of these markets, they also are deregulated. So in those deregulated markets, you would also be able to apply for direct energy. So some of those deregulated markets would be ERCOT, which is Texas, CAISO, which is in California, and a few others. But for the purpose of this call, we'll be focusing on virtual power purchase agreements, which can be signed in these current markets that are colored here. So your CAISOs, SPP, NISO. So why does that matter? Ultimately, we're here because we want to reduce our scope 2 emissions. So those are our purchased energy emissions through our utilities. And that may be, fairly large for a lot of, us that are industrial consumers, maybe us in the real estate who own multiple buildings. Our scope 2 emissions would, could be fairly significant. And there's only so much we could do through on-site and installing on-site capacity. And ultimately, if you want to decarbonize at scale, perhaps, there's other solutions that are needed. There's also scope 1. So those are emissions that are directly, created on-site, whether that's vehicle combustion, natural gas combustion, or anything like that in processing. And then there's scope 3. So scope 3 involves your whole supply chain. So, if you're a manufacturer like GM, and you also have, separate, retail arms like, Lear Corporation or any others that are, designing the seats or components of electrical systems, then those will count as your scope 3 emissions. So how do you mitigate scope 3 emissions, scope 2 emissions? So one of the ways, you could reduce your scope 2 emissions is through the purchasing of energy attribute certificates, so better known as RECs in the United States. There's different categorizations of them in Europe and the UK, GOs, REGOs. I mean, they all mean the same thing. At the end of the day, one REC or one GO is, offsetting 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy. So if you purchase, 10,000 renewable energy credits, then you're able to displace 10,000 megawatt hours of load of your scope 2 emissions in that market that you retire those renewable energy credits. And through the marketplace, as one that LevelTen Energy runs, you're able to sign these VPPAs and get those renewable energy credits, as well as the additionality, as we call it in the industry. So ultimately, additionality is because of your efforts as, the corporate buyer that's, putting your credit on the line, whether that's, investment grade, the developer could go out to a bank and, prove that they are bankable because they have this 10-year or 15-year agreement and get the finance needed to get this project built. So that's why additionality is very important. It allows a lot of these developers to, go out to market and build their projects. So as mentioned earlier, how do you use these, EACs or RECs? If you want to be 100% renewable, then you would just purchase the equivalent amount of RECs of your total scope 2 emissions, and that would make you 100% renewable. There are various options on how to do that aside from RECs, which we'll, talk about that in a little bit here in just a few more slides. But I would say a first good step is purchasing these renewable energy credits and offsetting your scope 2 emissions. I would say that is the most, you could just go out to a broker and purchase those RECs. We're happy here to connect you directly to one of those brokers if that's, a route that you would want to go. So as I mentioned, there's different paths to reduce your scope 2 emissions. One of them is those renewable energy credits. So those are lower commitment. You could just go out and purchase year over year, however much credits you would want to use to offset your scope 2 emissions. There's lower volatility as well. So usually those RECs over the last few years, they've ranged in price, from $3 to last year, they were up to about $7. I think right now they're about $5 per megawatt hour for RECs. So generally speaking, there's lower volatility on those than in wholesale energy market prices. We'll talk about that in a little bit on how VPPAs work and how it's a contract for difference, but ultimately RECs are lower volatility. On the con side, they have a lower impact. Some of these renewable energy credits could be generated by a plant that's already running. So we call these what we call merchant plants. So these plants, perhaps their VPPAs have run out with their corporate off-takers, and now they're just selling the energy directly to the grid and monetizing that. So that's great that power plant's online, but it's not really creating additional impact, which it's because it's not displacing additional brown power. It's already online, and those RECs are being generated regardless. On the other hand, it's pure operating costs. So year over year, perhaps you're spending $100,000 per year on purchasing these RECs. That's bookable. You know what you're spending, and you could kind of account for that in a direct, low volatility kind of manner. And that's good and bad. And perhaps that's what you want to do as a corporate. So you're able to kind of track those costs year over year. On the other hand, there's also utility and supplier green tariff programs. So those are offered directly through your utility. Here, would be Puget Sound Energy. Those are mainly available in regulated markets, which Washington State is a regulated market. So, the utility also owns the production of this energy source, whether that be renewables or natural gas or other forms. And, they're non-competitive. So you wouldn't go out to market and purchase or, sign a PPA with any one of these generating assets. So you would have to go directly through utility. It's sometimes a simpler process if the utilities are very direct, and these programs are very, I would say, built up and distributed it evenly across their customer base. On the other hand, there are a few cons to green tariff programs. These programs could require a premium. So maybe it's a $3 markup or a $5 markup to your retail energy bill. They may also not transfer the RECs directly. You may be purchasing the green energy, but you won't necessarily have the renewable energy credits to prove that, for CDP or SBTI, Science-Based Targets Initiative. And there's also limited availability. So not all utilities offer these green tariff programs. And a lot of times, if they do, they're very competitive and mostly, available to some of the largest energy consumers in their region. So, here, I believe, that would be your Starbucks, your Boeings. They do some of this with Puget Sound Energy, but maybe that's a whole subject for a whole separate webinar on how these green tariff programs work specifically to Puget Sound Energy. But I would say they're fairly competitive, and there's limited availability across the United States on those. And lastly, there's the power purchase agreement. So these agreements have higher impact because of that additionality aspect that I mentioned, because you're, pretty much putting your credit on a line and committing 10, 15 years of that secured revenue for that renewable energy project. That is very important for them to get the financing and get built. There could also be positive, settlements in these use cases. So these are what we call, contracts for differences. So you would sign the VPPA and you would have the ability to have a gain, or perhaps, pay a difference on the settled PPA price and the current wholesale energy market prices. We'll show that in a little bit more detail in an illustration here in just a bit on how that works. But there is the possibility for upside or also downside in a power purchase agreement. That's hence the risk in a VPPA. So it's critical for you to find a trusted advisor for them to help you through the procurement process. And that's where analytics play a huge part in finding these virtual power purchase agreements and being able to look at the different markets throughout the United States, what markets are best positioned for you to capture those positive settlement values. There's also a very long-term commitment as well. So a lot of these VPPAs on the lower side are about 10-year contracts. On average, I would say it's about 12 years. So I touched on this a little bit. So a power purchase agreement is an agreement to purchase the energy or virtually purchase the energy from a renewable energy producer. So that doesn't just have to be renewable energy. I mean, you could sign a PPA with a gas plant or a coal plant. It's a power purchase agreement for the energy. So that establishes a fixed cost for that renewable energy in this case. Whether that's $20, $25, $30 per megawatt hour. So that fixed price will stay and hold true for the duration of that term, whether that's 10, 15 years. And you would also be guaranteed the renewable energy credits as well, which, as I touched on previously, carry their own monetary value as well. So instead of going out to market and purchasing these year over year, you secure those RECs for 10, 15 years at the fixed PPA price that you're agreeing for in this PPA, plus or minus that contract for difference. So here's how the virtual power purchase agreement works. So as I mentioned, there is a fixed PPA price, which is in this diagram is that green line there that holds steady. On the other hand, as the VPPA off-taker, you would be exposed to wholesale spot market prices. So let's say the PPA price for a project is $25 per megawatt hour. And let's say that in the first year, on average, the energy price at the spot market was $27 per megawatt hour. In that case, the developer would return $2 per megawatt hour to the corporate buyer. So essentially, they're getting the RECs for free, and they're also getting a $2 positive settlement. That could be used as the corporate pleases. It could fund additional renewable energy or sustainability projects as well. On the other hand, the same is also true if energy prices fall below those $25. So let's say they fall to $23 per megawatt hour. In that case, you as the corporate buyer would make up the difference for those $2 and pay the developer that $2 difference, but you're still getting the RECs as well. So here below is just a quick diagram on how that works. So, the corporation gets the renewable energy credits, the corporate settles the energy with the renewable energy project, who then, sells that into the grid. So what are the benefits to commercial real estate owners? How could this possibly be a great solution for you all? This would allow you to meet your energy targets, your greenhouse gas emissions goals as well. It provides additionality, the energy attributes to reduce your scope 2 emissions. There's also the potential for a positive settlement. And if structured correctly, in the market where you sign the VPPA, there's an opportunity to use it as a hedge and lower your overall risk, both on the behind the meter retail, retail bills that you're paying, your direct energy utility, but also the virtual power purchase agreement aspect. So let's say you sign a virtual power purchase agreement in ERCOT, energy prices rise, so do your utility bills as well. But you could kind of offset that rise with the rise in the wholesale energy market settlement and your virtual power purchase agreement. So that difference will be higher, and you'll ultimately getting some revenue from that power purchase agreement to offset your higher utility bill costs as well. And this also allows you for operational flexibility as well. So virtual power purchase agreements, although they're signed in one location, let's say in ERCOT, which is Texas, you could use those renewable energy credits to offset your scope 2 emissions in other states as well, throughout the United States and Canada as well. So let's say you are a Washington state firm and you sign a VPPA in Texas, but all your load is in Washington state, and you have about, let's say 50,000 megawatt hours per year of, energy consumption. That would be about 500,000, kilowatt hours. You could then use those renewable energy credits that you're getting from that Texas project to offset your scope 2 emissions in Washington state. So here at LevelTen, just to show you a little bit of the analytics that we run and how markets could change, what we do is we run Monte Carlo simulations. So we take into account a variety of different risk factors that affect the energy markets. So anything from natural gas prices. The United States has a huge natural gas mix in energy. So if natural gas rises, so will wholesale energy prices. So we track that. There's also the penetration rates of renewables in any one market. So there's that cannibalization factor. So the more renewables, the more they'll push prices down in any given market, because renewables are ultimately one of the cheapest forms of energy. There's also other things such as heat rates. So how efficient is that market in generating power and delivering that power? So there's a variety of factors that attribute to how energy prices and how these settlements could happen in a virtual power purchase agreement. But ultimately, we take all those into account, and we're able to generate different scenarios. So we look at your P50, so your mean standard distribution on those generated Monte Carlo simulations that we run, and that's your most likely scenario. But we also look at the P10, the P90 scenarios as well. And ultimately, how long do these contracts take to negotiate? These are very long-term contracts, as I mentioned, and a lot of the times they require significant internal approval as well. So a big part of the initial process, I would say, about 2 months, is really getting everyone internally on the same page. So whether that be accounting, whether that be the CFO, anyone in procurement, legal, they would all have to be on board on, this initiative. So a top-down approach is a lot better than a bottom-up, but both are also able to, get this through the finish line. Perhaps, if you're starting from the bottom and want to, kind of champion for virtual power purchase agreements, then it would take a little bit more time. But as long as you're able to hoard everyone that will be a key decision maker and educate them along the way with a corporate advisor as well, such as some of our partners, then you would be able to create that momentum from the top and ultimately, move forward a lot more efficiently through this process. So the next process would be the procurement process, and that's where LevelTen Energy would be involved, and the tools that we have and the infrastructure that we've developed for you to find the ideal renewable energy project for you. So whether that be a specific size or perhaps a project that'll come online, for a specific date for you to meet those targets. So let's say you have a 2025 target to be 100% renewable. Then because these projects are additional and looking for financing and not yet built, you would want to find a project that has a commercial operation date, COD date, before 2025. So you would go out to market and find those projects. So you would find that through an RFP, so a request for proposal, and have a competitive process to find your project. And ultimately, the project selection phase is about 2 to 3 months. So that would be happening in month 3 through 5, based on the RFP and the results that you get from that RFP. With help from LevelTen and our partners, we would help you shortlist the potential projects that you would be evaluating. So during RFP, you could say you get about 20 to 30 projects available for selection, and you'll want to narrow that down to 5 or maybe 2 projects to kind of have on your short list and start interviewing and look, with the finer, tooth nail and maybe under the microscope for you to kind of evaluate each and every project a little closer. And then from there, once you select your project, then starts the term sheet and PPA negotiations, which is, no surprise, really the longest phase in the procurement process. Both you as the buyer and the developer are, talking and debating around what terms work best for each, which are buyer friendly, which are seller friendly. And this may take some back and forth, and ultimately, why it's about a 4-month process. So all in all, for a first-time buyer, it could be anywhere from 8 to even 14 months for these contracts to ultimately get signed. So some of the steps here, we'll map them out a little bit more clearly. Here is, with the help of one of our partners, you as a corporate buyer would fill out what we call client intake form and questionnaire. So we would get a little bit of an idea of what size of load are you looking at, what markets, COD date, any renewable energy target that you might have in order to kind of prepare and start building a business case around your procurement. You'd want to, as I mentioned earlier, launch the stakeholder, process, identifying those key decision makers internally and educate them on what a VPPA is and how does it benefit a corporate. Prepare, your treasury, your legal, your stakeholders, define the procurement strategy. So how will you go out to market? Will you sign 1 or 2 PPAs? And how will that process kind of work? Will it be timed? And ultimately, once you and your advisor are ready to go out to market, then you go out through LevelTen Energy and run these competitive bid processes through the marketplace. And then you would, analyze these projects. You would run the analytics on the projects, use our, Monte Carlo tools, but also perhaps other third-party forecasts as well. So maybe a future on, future energy price settlements and perhaps other variables that you would want to look and define depending on what market you're looking at. Conduct interviews with these project developers as well So once you identify those 2 or 3 projects, you would then schedule those interviews to, get to know exactly who the developer is, where the project is located, has this project, had, all its work permits in place? Are there other environmental impacts that you're looking at as a corporate buyer? I would say nowadays that's, very important for a lot of off takers as well. So it's a lot of these buyers are looking for other ways to stand out, and perhaps, you want to make a story out of job creation in the market that this project is being built in, or perhaps environmental conservation, or, maybe, creating jobs in that market. So those are some of the environmental, social justice impacts that a project could have, and maybe you want a project that's going to create those, ESG aspects more than others. And, completing contract negotiations and having, what is also very important, outside legal counsel in these agreements. So, talking with your legal counsel, redlining and commenting on this contract for that 4-month period. And then ultimately signing your VPPA, and, publicly announcing it to the world. These VPPA announcements have, been growing year over year. Last year, there was over 31 gigawatts of PPA signed in the world. The previous year, in 2020, that was 25 gigawatts. And this year, we're on pace to break that 31 gigawatt record that we had last year. So renewable energy procurement, the signing of these VPPAs has continued to grow. And we really do need that to kind of reach our clean energy targets here in the United States, but also globally. And then lastly, you would want to monitor your VPPA as well, which, LevelTen has what we call a performance monitoring tool. So you're able to track the energy generation of your project, the amount of RECs, the forecasted settlements, and the current settlements of your project, just for you to stay on top of your project and how it's performing. Real quickly, here's just a quick screenshot of our marketplace. This is a European project here. But you're able to see the general location of the project. You're able to see the amount of energy, the terms, the settlement location, the PPA price, which in this case would be $37, and the projected value, which is a projected settlement using those forecast curves. So on average, this particular sample project will, give you a positive settlement of $8, €8 to be specific. But, we'll also track the development maturity. So how far along is this project to being fully built? And that's very important in this current market. Ultimately, just because you find a project, it doesn't mean it's going to be built. So LevelTen does a lot of due diligence on our end to make sure that these projects have, work permits in place, their supply chain sorted out, their interconnection applications as well in place. And that all goes into this score that we've developed. So from a scale of 0 to 100, 100 out of 100 being fully complete and operational. And this project here is, in the middle of the road of being built. We also offer other tools here at LevelTen, such as Impact Plus. As I mentioned before, aside from the potential value of projects, the economic value, there's also the environmental value as well. So we have a great white paper that we partnered with the Audubon and the Nature Conservancy Society on creating these impact scores. So whether that be climate, community, or conservation, we look at those aspects of the built environment around these projects and how will this project benefit each of those different, stakeholders. So whether that be in the environment or the community, how will this project positively create an impact in that community? Here's a little bit more about that concept. So as I mentioned, this is perhaps important for buyers that are just looking more than just the rec. They're trying to go beyond the megawatt. They want to be able to create a story out of their procurement process. That could be marketed as well. And you could also gain the ability to have a positive kind of marketing aspect through these project procurements outside of just the renewable energy and additionality aspect. So real quick, a case study here on Starbucks, which is a local to Seattle area and may apply to the retailer, or real estate concept as well. So Starbucks, they have a variety of different locations across the United States, retail chains across the US, and that is specifically why VPPA is a benefit to them, is because they have this decentralized load in California or New York or Maine or any other state. They're able to use these VPPAs to offset their scope 2 emissions throughout the United States. So they acquire these RECs from these renewable energy projects, and they're able to allocate them to those 3,000 plus stores and reduce their scope 2 emissions. Just on-site alone wouldn't be able to be a solution for someone like Starbucks. There's only so much roof space that you have, and that would also be true for the real estate tenants as well, or the real estate owners. There's only so much roof space for you to install these solar panels, and if you really want to decarbonize at scale, then you have to go offsite and look at utility scale projects. And that's what we were able to do with Starbucks, and create a portfolio of different renewable energy assets, throughout North Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, to create a total in size of 146 megawatts of projects. So that allowed them to diversify, but that's also a very, very large load, I would say. That's about, when I say 146 megawatts, that's the total nameplate capacity of the project. So if the project were online, 100% of the time, hour over hour over the year, then that's how much, renewable, that's how much energy it would produce. So 146 times how many hours there are in a year, which is 8,760. Though renewable energy projects are intermittent, so they only come online and produce the power when there is solar generation or when there is wind generation. So ultimately that value gets cut down. So for 146 megawatts on a year-long basis, that could be anywhere from 280,000 to 400,000 megawatt hours per year. So that's quite a lot of energy. So what if you don't necessarily have that huge of a portfolio? There may be other options. There's also what we call aggregation. So here, the 2030 district has created a community of different real estate owners or your stakeholders, and perhaps that's the path forward if you don't have that specific large load, anywhere above 50,000 or 100,000 megawatt hours per year. What you could then do is aggregate. Perhaps each one of you have 10,000 or 15, 20,000 megawatt hours of load. You could aggregate in a group of 5, 7, 10 buyers and benefit on the economics of scale of a larger project. You're able to get a lower PPA price, perhaps be more appealing to a developer to sign these agreements with you because you're able to create critical mass. And instead of 15,000 megawatt hours a year of load combined, you guys could be 100,000 or 200,000 megawatt hours per year. So that helps, companies with smaller loads, and it could enhance business relationships, create a great story on how, this whole kind of network partnered up and created, this ability to transact when otherwise it wouldn't be an opportunity. Offers mutual learning along the process. And it could also be a tool for credit intermediation as well. But there's also the pros and cons on that aspect as well, which we'll touch here on the risks. So an aggregation could push the deal process further back. Instead of one party being involved in the transaction, now there's 7 or 10. So there's a lot more stakeholders. You have to pace yourselves. Everyone has to be on the same page. There has to be alignment around the contracting, so the terms. So do you want to sign a 12-year or 15-year PPA? Do you want it to come online earlier or later? Those are all things that have to align as well as the credit as well. So because a lot of these developers need the credit to be built, they really only look for credit or investment grade buyers. If you're sub-investment grade or don't have a credit rating, it makes it a lot difficult for these developers to go out to a financier and get the financing required to build these projects. So, if someone's kind of anchoring the aggregation with, great credit, then maybe that helps. But if there are, 3 or 4 sub-investment grade buyers, and that could push everyone's, aggregated credit rating down. So that would be one of the risks. There may be also anti-competitive concerns. So if you and someone else don't get along, let's say Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you wouldn't want to be in a deal alongside your main competitor. So here are just some of the 6 rules to consider in aggregation. Here at LevelTen, we have, worked on an aggregation opportunity before that included Bloomberg, Cox Enterprises, Salesforce, Gap, Workday. So we were able to help them procure on a single project of 133 megawatts in direct capacity. And each of these buyers were able to procure a chunk of that project. So one of the things to consider is shared perspective. So make sure that you want to go out to market in the same state, whether that be ERCOT or CAISO, common time frame, willingness to agree on a general form of agreement, manage the credit differences appropriately, common representation, as I mentioned before. So make sure you have the same legal counsel helping throughout the BPA negotiation process, and alignment on how to measure these results. So, on the carbon side of things. So how are you going to use these RECs in general? How's the developer going to be attributing these RECs on behalf of each buyer? So, ultimately, some of the key takeaways here is that for the real estate industry, you might have a national portfolio, and perhaps this is a great opportunity to reduce your scope to emissions at scale through a virtual power purchase agreement. You're able to sign a project in a market that has high, settlement values, and potentially benefit on those positive settlements, and use those RECs to offset your loads in various locations throughout the United States. There's also that additionality aspect as well. So you're helping push the clean energy transition forward, because you're helping build new renewable energy assets, but also displacing brown power as well. So that is our goal here at the end of the day. Climate change, and as we reduce these, brown power plants, and have more renewable energy generating capacity on the grid, and we're able to reduce those greenhouse gas emission targets, and hopefully meet the Paris climate agreement 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we have in mind, or even the 2 degrees Celsius at this point would be great. So the VPPA is better suited for larger energy off-takers. So anywhere from 50,000 megawatt hours per year and above is ideal for a single off-taker. If your loads are lower than that, then aggregation is the way to go. So if it's 10,000 or 15,000, then you would probably want to look at an aggregation opportunity. Now, again, aggregation isn't the easiest. There's a lot of caveats to it. That's, why you would have someone like a trusted partner, such as 3 Degrees, or even JLL, who has done a lot on the sustainability end and developed their own sustainability arm, and also partner of LevelTen, could help you, bring together a group of potential buyers and aggregate. And then ultimately, the ability to get these RECs. So through a VPPA, you secure these RECs. You don't have to go out to market and purchase these RECs year over year and spend, 50,000 or 100,000, however equivalent that is to your megawatt hours per year generated and the purchasing of those individual RECs. So that gives you the security on being able to secure these renewable energy credits and being able to offset your scope 2 emissions. So those are our key takeaways here. To some here in the real estate industry, that would be a benefit. It's may not be available to all. As I mentioned, this is really a high load solution, and the ability to scale, if you have that kind of scale or have a fairly large portfolio of real estate assets. If you don't quite get in the range of 10,000, 20,000 megawatt hours per year, then perhaps a good solution is on-site. And that could be a whole different webinar on how on-site works and what are some local developers, or perhaps going the green tariff route with your local utility and being able to partner with your local utility as well. So that brings us to the end here of the presentation. We have a few minutes here for some Q&A, and I'll let Daniel and Ann here kind of go through the Q&A and see if there's any good questions, which I'm sure there's a lot of.
Well, thank you so much, Christian. We really appreciate you and LevelTen coming today to talk to us about virtual power purchase agreements. I think this is a really exciting opportunity. And, given that we're not a very big group, we thought we might just allow folks to unmute and ask their questions in the order that they were asked. So, Dwayne, if you would like to, we can have you unmute and ask your question.
Sure. My question is about how well these survive. And say a company signs one of these agreements, and a couple of years later, it's terrible economic times, and they just stop paying. One is, would there be consequences? And the other is, are there examples of where people can negotiate to with the seller to get out of these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are termination clauses in a PPA. Ultimately, neither party it's not in their best interest to leave the contract agreement. So there are damages that need to be paid that generally could be agreed during the negotiation process of the PPA. That could be anywhere from $20,000 up to $100,000 per megawatt hour of damages that you would have to pay. So ultimately, as a company, you would have to decide, is it best for me to pay that kind of termination clause, or just continue with the VPPA? On the other hand, I would say that energy prices have only continued to rise. So if you signed a PPA in 2018, chances are you're doing fairly great on these virtual power purchase agreements. If you're not, then you probably didn't transact in the most appropriate way, or found the best advisors. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and just one other follow-up, just trying to get a handle on the scale of your sort of threshold size.
Mm-hmm.
If you have, say, a 1 million square foot building, and you're trying to get all of your power renewable through one of these agreements, is that a big enough investment to be able to get one on your own?
Yeah, I would say 1,000,000 square feet. I mean, I would say a single commercial building wouldn't necessarily generate those kinds of loads of, let's say, 50,000 megawatt hours per year. Maybe if you were a large industrial, steel manufacturing plant that's, just continuously, having energy delivered and consuming energy, then perhaps that single, plant would generate that specific load. But for the real estate industry, we've seen that it's more an aggregation of, buildings. So if you have a large building portfolio, that would, be more likely a solution, for you.
Thank you.
Great. Chell, you had a question from L&M.
Yeah, it's very similar to Dwayne's questions about the minimum size, but also about, let's say I buy one and I realize I'm using a lot less energy than I expected. Maybe I have a bunch of buildings and some data centers moved out, and now I have extra capacity. Can I resell that or the RECs from it or something like that?
Yeah, it's also another very good question on, you do sign a specific amount of the energy that you're getting, not necessarily specific. There's a capacity that you agree to, and that chunk of the capacity, depending on the weather, could generate more or less the amount of renewable energy credits that you would need. So ultimately, these credits do have a shelf life of about 2 years. So, you could save those for the next year, but you could also sell these RECs as well. So these RECs are yours as the corporate off-taker. A lot of the times they're retired on your behalf. But if you do have surplus credits, you could always go out to market and sell those renewable energy credits as well.
All right. And one more question, which is, I guess, why can't smaller buyers enter the market? Is there regulatory reasons why smaller buyers can't, or is it just the process is just so lengthy and cumbersome and complex that it doesn't make financial sense for entities below 20,000 megawatt hours or so?
Yeah, that I would say it's a mix of those, different, specific things you mentioned there. It's mostly the economics of scale of smaller projects just don't make the same amount of, economic impact as would a larger project. So all these projects are mostly utility scale, so they're able to offer wholesale energy prices. Ultimately what you pay at the retail level through your retail energy provider, like a Puget Sound Energy, is a lot higher of a price than these wholesale energy projects. So think of, buying, food at a Costco or anything like that. You'd be paying wholesale prices at that stage. And in order to benefit from those economics of scale, these projects are just huge. And, that's why they go out to market for a lot of these larger consumers of energy. So whether that would be, someone like a Starbucks with thousands of locations, or maybe a steel plant with a few locations, but, huge concentrated loads. That's, why ultimately that's a solution for them. But it's also the credit aspect as well. So, you're more likely to be publicly, credited if you're larger as well. So there's a variety of reasons. There's also on-site opportunities, and, a lot of utility, providers are kind of being pushed to offer these green tariff programs. So hopefully in the future, there's a lot more solutions at the local level through your utility.
Great. I think we have a question from Fareed.
Yeah, so my question was, well, it's Yasser. Yasser is going to take the question from our team. Thank you. Okay, I don't know if Yasser's on mute, but just a quick question for you on, have you worked on any Canadian projects?
Yeah, we have worked on a few Canadian projects. So in Canada, there's Ontario and also Alberta as some markets. Ontario's quasi-regulated, so a lot of the deals have happened in Alberta. There's a limited amount of corporate buyers with significant size in those areas, or in Canada in general. I would say that market has been a little slower than the US market in terms of momentum for these renewable energy projects, or VPPAs to be specific. But there's a lot of additional value in Alberta because that market is less mature as I would say the United States. So there's a lot of value in that market. On the other end, why there hasn't been a whole lot of procurements there is because of the locality kind of story that you would want to make as a corporate off-taker. So, you have most of your load, 90% of your load in the United States, but you sign a VPPA in Canada. There's worries about, someone, looking at your story through, the microscope and saying, hey, all your load is in the United States. Why did you, sign a project in Canada? So that might be, one of the reasons, but there are opportunities in both markets.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sorry, this is Yas speaking. I was muted earlier, so I missed that. But I had a question about really costs associated with the REC certification process. I've heard mixed reviews on that. Some people say it's expensive, but I really haven't been able to find any information on who's responsible for it and how much would that cost. Like, is that something significant, or is it not really that significant when you're dealing with this?
Yeah, I would say at the utility scale size of things, a lot of these developers have, deals in place, or they push so much volume with RECs through the third party, I would say regulators of renewable energy credits. So one of those is Greenie. Greenie does a lot of the certification around RECs to make sure that, a project isn't producing 2 RECs per 1 megawatt hour of energy. So Greenie does a lot of certification. When you look at our marketplace, when you run these RFPs, one of your requirements can be that this project needs to be Greenie certified. So the RECs will need to be Greenie certified, and that would be, that would be reflected in the PPA price. So it wouldn't be a fee that the buyer would need to pay. It would already be embedded into the PPA price. So I would say that that's more on the maybe on-site scale of things, where you would need to go and certify those RECs at a smaller scale.
This is Perry. I have a question, couple actually. First one is kind of a total cost of ownership. So it's my understanding with the VPPA that any maintenance costs are covered for the 10-year agreement. I'm wondering also is as far as if there's any damage from any kind of event that might cause a problem with some portion of the systems. Is that also included? And does the system have a end of life clause within the agreement?
Yeah, so fundamentally, these utility scale projects work a lot different than on-site. There isn't a whole lot of CapEx in terms of the buyer paying. This is more of OpEx and operating costs, but not directly for the corporate buyer. As I mentioned, these are contract for differences, so there wouldn't be any direct payments in terms of the operation of the project. It would be merely the fixed for floating aspect of the contract. So these are purely financial contracts. So whether the wholesale energy price is below or above that agreed upon PPA price, then that would be what the off-taker, or the buyer would be paying in that specific scenario. Up until then, in terms of upfront costs, a lot of the times, depending on the advisor that you're ultimately getting advice from, some may charge you times and materials for the advisory and consultancy, or maybe embed that into the PPA price and have the developer kind of, mix that into the overall PPA price because the advisor is making their fees directly from the developer. So ultimately, in terms of cost, you as the buyer would most likely just pay for the outside legal counsel or any advisory support for getting these deals in place. As we mentioned previously, these are complex deals. They are very long-term. And then ultimately on your other question around, any damages that may happen or, because of the maintenance or anything like that. In the agreement itself, there are clauses that this project will be online for it's pretty market standard for it to be online for 95% of the time. These projects will, have specific times where they will, put the project down for maintenance, whether that's cleaning the solar panels or anything like that. But they would do that, during times when that project wouldn't be generating the energy, because ultimately there's a clause in the contract for it to have to generate up to 95% of its total expected generation for the entire year. If it doesn't, then there are, delay damages that will be passed on to the corporate buyer to go out to market and purchase those RECs, because ultimately when this project isn't online, you're not getting those renewable energy credits. So you still need those credits to maybe meet your yearly, kind of targets or, offsetting for scope 2 emissions.
One follow-up question, private versus public. So for municipalities with this, or their strong mandates for net zero, is there any more complexity in terms of becoming a buyer for the VPPA?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, we haven't worked a whole lot with municipalities. I would say a lot of them are, run their own processes, or perhaps, they require a different set of, advisory components. So that's not a specific market that we've kind of specialized in. So I wouldn't be able to give a, a direct answer on that.
Thank you very much, Christian.
Yep.
Great. I think we have one last question from Yasser, and then if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to email them to me or to info@leveltenenergy.com. Yasser, are you still with us and want to ask your question? So he just had a quick question around, do you have forecasting capabilities for utility rates or voluntary REC pricing?
Yeah, that would be only in those wholesale energy markets that I mentioned previously. Because those markets are liquid and they're competitive, then we do have data on, what current market prices are, what utility prices are, and we're able to run analytics in those markets. In other, regulated markets like Washington State, there's really only one or two entities that are, supplying the energy and distributing the energy. So there isn't that liquidity. So we wouldn't be able to offer that in those markets. No one would, or it would be very bespoke and, time consuming. And then on the other side of the question as well, on the REC side, there are third-party REC forecasters as well. And, we can get that data. We're able to, kind of tie that into the procurement process for the VPPA, and perhaps, what is your avoided cost if you sign a VPPA versus, what PPA prices will be today or tomorrow, and how does that stack up with the virtual power purchase agreement? So those are things we're able to look into as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Christian, for joining us and talking about VPPAs. I think that this is a really interesting thing for our members to explore. We really appreciate your time, and thank you all for attending. We will be sharing out the recording of the presentation to attendees and the slide deck, courtesy of LevelTen. So thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next education forum in June.